Isaac Newton arrived at Trinity College, Cambridge in 1661, a quiet, intensely curious young man from a farming family. He was just 18, leaving behind the windswept fields of Woolsthorpe for the imposing stone walls and scholarly traditions of one of England's most prestigious universities. The journey itself was daunting, but Newton's mind was already racing with questions about the world. Cambridge was a world apart from rural Woolsthorpe, its ancient buildings steeped in tradition and faith. The city bustled with scholars, debates, and rituals, a place where centuries of learning echoed through every stone corridor. Newton, not wealthy, worked as a sizar, performing menial tasks to fund his studies. He swept floors, waited on wealthier students, and endured the social stigma that came with his position, but he never let it distract him from his studies. He quickly surpassed the standard curriculum, drawn more to the revolutionary ideas of Descartes and Galileo than to Aristotle. Newton devoured every book he could find, often teaching himself advanced mathematics and natural philosophy late into the night. His notebooks filled with questions about light, motion, and matter. He scribbled observations, calculations, and wild speculations, laying the groundwork for discoveries that would change the world. Trinity was as much a religious institution as an academic one. Daily prayers and chapel attendance were mandatory. The rhythms of faith shaped every aspect of college life, from lectures to mealtimes. For most, this blend of faith and learning was natural, but for Newton, it became a source of private tension. He questioned doctrines in silence, wrestling with ideas that set him apart from his peers. He followed the rules, excelling in his studies, and was soon recognized for his brilliance. Professors took notice, and Newton's reputation as a prodigy began to spread through the college halls. During the plague years, Newton developed early ideas on calculus, optics, and gravity. Forced to leave Cambridge, he retreated to Woolsthorpe, where isolation fueled his creativity and led to some of his most profound insights. Upon returning, he was elected a Fellow of Trinity, a prestigious post that offered security and freedom for research. This recognition marked a turning point, granting him the resources and respect he needed to pursue his scientific ambitions. But this honor came with a catch. Fellows were expected to take holy orders, binding them to the Anglican Church. The requirement was more than ceremonial. It was a test of loyalty and belief. Newton now stood at the threshold of a scientific revolution, yet a hidden conflict was brewing. His private doubts about religious conformity clashed with the expectations of his new role. The requirement to conform religiously would soon threaten everything he had achieved. Newton faced a dilemma: to follow his conscience, or to secure his place in the academic world he loved. The stage was set for a collision between public conformity and private conviction, a struggle that would shape not only Newton's future, but the course of science itself. Trinity's rules demanded that fellows be ordained as priests within 7 years of their MA, a tradition that shaped the very fabric of academic life at Cambridge. For Newton, this was not a mere formality or bureaucratic step. It meant swearing a solemn oath to uphold the 39 Articles of Anglican faith, binding his conscience to doctrines he was beginning to question. Most fellows accepted this requirement as a natural part of their academic journey, but Newton's private studies and relentless curiosity led him to probe the very foundations of Christian doctrine. Chief among these was the doctrine of the Trinity, the belief in God as three co-equal persons, a mystery at the heart of Anglican orthodoxy. Newton's exhaustive scriptural research convinced him that the Trinity was a later invention, a doctrine added centuries after the earliest days of Christianity, not part of the original faith. He came to see God the Father as supreme, with Jesus Christ as a divine mediator, exalted but not equal to the Father, a view that set him apart from nearly all his peers. To reject the Trinity was not just controversial, it was heresy, punishable by law, career-ending, and even dangerous in an age when religious dissent could mean social ruin or worse. Newton faced an impossible choice: lose his fellowship and the future he had worked so hard for, or live a lie and betray his deepest convictions. The pressure mounted relentlessly as the ordination deadline approached, each day bringing new anxiety and uncertainty. He even considered abandoning academia altogether, rather than betray his conscience and publicly affirm beliefs he could not accept. The man unraveling the mysteries of the cosmos now found himself trapped by the rigid rules and expectations of his college and his time. Newton's crisis was not just theological, it was existential, threatening his identity, his career, and his sense of purpose. His quest for truth in science was mirrored by a secret, perilous search for religious truth, a journey that demanded both courage and secrecy. The countdown to a defining decision had begun, and Newton's private crisis would shape not only his own destiny, but the future of science and faith. Newton's private theology was as rigorous and methodical as his science, shaped by a relentless quest for truth. He approached matters of faith with the same analytical mind that revolutionized physics and mathematics, refusing to accept dogma without evidence. He rejected the doctrine of the Trinity, convinced that only one all-powerful God, the Father, truly existed. For Newton, the idea of a triune God was a later invention, unsupported by the earliest scriptures. Jesus, in Newton's eyes, was the Son of God, but not God himself. Worship, he believed, belonged to the Father alone. This distinction set him apart from nearly all his contemporaries. These radical views, rooted in thousands of hours of solitary study, echoed the ancient heresy of Arianism, long condemned by the Church and punishable by law. Newton also doubted the immortality of the soul, believing instead in resurrection at the end of time, a belief that challenged centuries of Christian tradition. He approached the Bible as a historical document, learning Hebrew and Greek to uncover its original meanings. Newton pored over ancient texts, searching for the earliest, purest form of Christianity. Newton saw later doctrines as corruptions, designed to empower priests and church authorities, not to reflect divine truth. He believed the original faith had been lost to centuries of political maneuvering. In public, Newton conformed to the Church of England, but in private he saw himself as a restorer of what he believed was the true, uncorrupted faith of the early Christians. Anti-Trinitarianism was illegal in England. Exposure meant expulsion from university, prosecution, and social ruin. The risks were immense. Newton's dual life was a matter of survival, forcing him to guard his beliefs with utmost secrecy. His scientific freedom and reputation depended on keeping his heretical ideas hidden from public view. The tension between public orthodoxy and private conviction defined Newton's existence, shaping both his work and his legacy. Newton's heresy was not a passing doubt, but the very core of his intellectual identity, a secret that influenced every aspect of his life. His study was both a laboratory for scientific discovery and a sanctuary for forbidden beliefs, where the boundaries between science and faith blurred in the mind of a genius. To justify his beliefs, Newton became a pioneering historian of early Christianity. He traced the origins of the Trinity to the Council of Nicaea, seeing it as a political, not divine, turning point. Newton argued that Athanasius and others imposed a philosophical idea onto the Church, corrupting its original message. He filled thousands of manuscript pages with evidence, claiming Trinitarianism was borrowed from pagan philosophy. Newton believed he was restoring the ancient wisdom, Prisca Sapientia, lost over centuries. His scientific discoveries and theological research were both acts of recovery. For Newton, stripping away historical corruption was as vital in religion as in science. He saw himself as a detective, uncovering a millennia-old crime against faith. Newton's research led him to a radical conclusion. The Bible itself had been altered to support the Trinity. He compared ancient manuscripts, identifying verses he believed were later additions. In his manuscript, he exposed passages like the Johannine comma as forgeries. Newton argued that key verses supporting the Trinity were absent from the earliest Greek texts. He saw these changes as deliberate, a pious fraud to bolster church doctrine. For Newton, the true Bible was strictly monotheistic, centered on God the Father. This conviction made ordination impossible for him in good conscience. His scholarly integrity and religious beliefs were inseparable. Newton saw himself not as a heretic, but as a restorer of original Christian truth. His findings deepened his resolve to resist religious conformity. Newton's view of God shaped his science. He saw the universe as requiring God's constant, active presence, not a clockwork left to run on its own. In the Principia, Newton argued that the order of the cosmos was proof of a powerful, intelligent creator. He clashed with Leibniz, who mocked Newton's interventionist God. Newton insisted that God's ongoing governance was a sign of divine power, not weakness. For him, science and faith were inseparable. Studying nature was a form of worship. The laws of physics were glimpses into the mind of God. The God of Newton's universe was the singular, all-powerful Father, consistent with his anti-Trinitarian beliefs. His science was an extension of his secret theology. The universe for Newton was God's temple, governed by divine law. Newton devoted years to decoding biblical prophecy, treating it as a coded history of the world. He used systematic analysis to calculate the timing of the end times, arguing the apocalypse was far off, no earlier than 2060. Newton criticized sensationalist predictions, seeking reasoned, careful interpretation. He believed prophetic days equaled years, aligning biblical timelines with world history. The rise of Trinitarianism for him was a foretold apostasy. Newton saw history as guided by God toward a final restoration of true religion. His work on prophecy was as serious as his science, a quest for unified understanding. Newton read both the book of nature and the book of scripture to grasp God's plan. Prophecy, science, and theology were all parts of his search for divine order. The weight of secrecy shaped Newton's life and legacy. Fear of exposure made him guarded and fiercely private. The crisis over ordination peaked in the 1670s. Newton confided in a few trusted allies. With their help, he secured a royal dispensation exempting him from holy orders. This allowed him to remain at Cambridge and continue his groundbreaking work. The experience reinforced his need for caution and secrecy. For centuries, Newton was remembered only as a scientific genius and pious Anglican. His vast theological writings were hidden, deemed too dangerous to publish. Much of Newton's spiritual life was erased from public memory. The true complexity of his character remained buried for generations. For centuries, Newton's secret beliefs remained hidden. His family suppressed his theological manuscripts, fearing scandal. Only in the 20th century, after his papers were auctioned, did scholars discover the depth of his religious quest. John Maynard Keynes famously called Newton the last of the magicians, recognizing the unity of his science and faith. Today, we see Newton as both a scientific revolutionary and a radical religious thinker. His rejection of the Trinity was the core of a lifelong mission to purify Christianity. The unveiling of his hidden beliefs has made Newton a more complex, deeply human figure. His struggle at Trinity was the crucible that forged both his science and his soul.